Danny Wright stared at the official-looking envelope on his grandmother's kitchen table like it might explode. Gold trim, fancy seals, words he couldn't pronounce stamped across the front in 3 different languages, only one of which was English. "That's junk mail, right?" he asked, poking it with a fork. His grandmother, Ruth, barely glanced up from her newspaper.
"Came by special courier."
Alien special courier had 4 arms and apologized twice for stepping on the porch. Danny's fork paused mid-poke. Earth had only joined the galactic community 5 years ago, right after the big reveal that humans weren't alone in the universe. Most people freaked out. Ruth had just nodded and said she'd suspected as much. Danny was 12 at the time and mostly annoyed that the news interrupted his video game tournament. Why would aliens send me mail? Danny grabbed the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a holographic card that activated the moment he touched it. A 3-dimensional figure appeared above the table, some kind of bird-lizard hybrid wearing way too many medals. "Greetings, representative of Earth," the hologram announced. "You have been selected to participate in the prestigious Apex Hunt, a competition of skill, courage, and honor held every decade. The greatest hunters from across the galaxy will gather to test their abilities against the most dangerous creatures known to exist. Your attendance is mandatory under Galactic Law, Article 7, Section 12. Transportation will arrive in 3 standard days. Glory awaits." The hologram vanished. Danny and Ruth sat in silence for a solid 10 seconds. "What did you do?" Ruth asked. "Nothing. I don't even know what this is." Danny flipped the card over. There was a confirmation number and his name spelled perfectly, middle initial included. "Wait, this has to be a mistake." "I'm 17. I'm nobody." Ruth took the card from him and examined it closely. Her eyes, sharp from decades of living in the Oregon wilderness, narrowed. "This is legitimate. See that seal? That's the Confederation mark. Can't be forged. But I didn't sign up for anything." "Did you fill out any forms recently?" "Online surveys." "Contests?" Danny thought back. Last week he'd clicked on something that promised a cash prize for gamers. It had asked for his name and address. "Oh no. Oh yes." Ruth set the card down carefully. "Well, you're going to space. Grandma, I can't go to space. I have school. I have plans to do absolutely nothing this summer." The message said mandatory. "That means you don't have a choice." Ruth stood and walked to the cupboard, pulling out her old military trunk. "If you're going to compete with alien hunters, you'll need proper preparation." "I'm not a hunter." Ruth turned and gave him a look that could freeze lava. "Boy, I've been teaching you to track deer since you were 6 years old." "You can find a rabbit in a snowstorm and tell me what it ate for breakfast 3 days ago. You notice things people with fancy degrees miss. Don't sell yourself short." Danny wanted to argue, but she had a point. Growing up on Ruth's homestead meant learning to survive. She was a retired Marine who believed modern kids were too soft. While his classmates played organized sports, Danny learned to purify water, build shelters, and track animals through any terrain. He could start a fire with damp wood and identify edible plants in the dark. He just never thought those skills mattered. They were just things Grandma made him do. Over the next 3 days, news spread fast. Apparently, the Galactic Confederation had sent Earth an official invitation to participate in some big competition, and the government had tried to organize a committee to select the perfect representative. Decorated soldiers, expert survivalists, famous hunters all volunteered. Then someone discovered that the invitation had been processed incorrectly. Due to a clerical error involving a misfiled jury duty summons and an online contest registration, the invitation had been legally accepted by Daniel Wright, age 17, of Portland. Oregon galactic law was apparently very strict about registered participants. Once someone accepted, no substitutions were allowed. The government tried to negotiate. The aliens said no. Rules were rules. Danny watched the news coverage from his grandmother's couch, eating cereal and wondering if this was all a fever dream. "They're saying you'll embarrass Earth," Ruth commented, reading from her tablet. "Politicians are calling it a disaster. The military wants to give you a crash course in combat." "Great. Fantastic. Love that for me. They don't understand." Ruth set down the tablet and looked at Danny seriously. "Those fancy hunters with their fancy equipment are going to overthink everything. They'll rely on technology and weapons, but hunting isn't about having the best gear. It's about understanding behavior, patience, reading signs, becoming part of the environment. You really think I can do this?" I think you're the only one who sees the world the way hunters need to see it. Everyone else forgot how. She reached into the trunk and pulled out an old knife in a worn leather sheath. This was your grandfather's marine issue. Take it, Danny took the knife carefully. It felt solid and real in a way that made the whole situation suddenly concrete. He was actually going to space. He was actually going to compete against alien hunters. The transport ship arrived exactly when promised. It landed in the field behind Ruth's house, a sleek silver craft that hummed with power. A ramp extended. Ruth handed Danny a backpack she'd prepared, filled with basic supplies and a few tools. "Remember what I taught you," she said. "Watch before you act. Listen before you move. Respect the prey, understand the environment, and don't try to fight nature. Work with it. What if I mess this up? Then you mess it up. But you won't die wondering what would have happened if you tried." She hugged him briefly, then pushed him toward the ship. "Now go show those aliens what a human can do." Danny walked up the ramp, backpack over one shoulder, wearing jeans and his favorite hoodie. Behind him, Earth continued spinning. Ahead of him, the galaxy waited with expectations he didn't ask for and a competition he didn't understand. He figured he might as well see what happened. Frontier Base 7 smelled like metal and something Danny couldn't identify, probably alien sweat. The station floated in neutral space, a massive ring structure where different species could meet without political complications. Danny shuffled through the arrival gate behind a group of tall, blue-skinned traders who kept glancing back at him like he was a lost child. An official greeted him at customs, a being that looked like a walking stick insect wearing a uniform. Its translator device crackled before speaking in English. "Daniel Wright of Earth?" "Yes, that's me." The official's antennae twitched in what might have been confusion. "You are Earth's representative for the Apex hunt?" "Apparently. I see. Follow me, please. The other participants are gathering in the main hall." They walked through corridors filled with aliens of every description. Some had fur, others had scales. A few were just floating energy clouds in containment suits. All of them stared at Danny. He kept his hands in his hoodie pockets and tried to look less like someone who'd rather be home playing video games. The main hall was enormous, with viewing screens covering the walls and a central platform where holographic displays showed various terrifying creatures. Danny counted about 30 beings scattered around the room, all of them looking significantly more prepared than he felt. Near the front stood two identical reptilian aliens, easily 8 feet tall with silver scales and armor that probably cost more than Danny's house. They noticed him immediately and started laughing, a hissing sound that made several other species turn to look. "Is that the human?" one of them said loudly. "Earth sent a child?" "Look at his clothing," the other added. "He came to hunt in sleeping garments." Danny wanted to point out that hoodies were not sleepwear, but decided silence was better. He found a seat in the back and pulled out his phone, which surprisingly still had a signal thanks to some galactic network his grandmother had set up before he left. More hunters arrived over the next hour. A group of insect-like soldiers moved in perfect formation, their leader wearing a helmet with multiple eye slots. A massive bear creature with gray fur and ritual scars entered alone, carrying nothing but a wooden staff. An actual robot hunter scanned the room with glowing sensors. A cat-like alien in expensive-looking armor made a grand entrance, accompanied by servants carrying her equipment. Everyone looked professional. Everyone looked dangerous. Everyone looked like they belonged here. Danny did not look like he belonged here. A hologram appeared on the central platform, showing the same bird-lizard official from the invitation. "Welcome, honored hunters. The Apex Hunt is the galaxy's most prestigious competition. For those new to this tradition, allow me to explain the rules." Danny actually paid attention now, watching the holographic displays shift to show a wild planet covered in forests, mountains, and oceans. You will be transported to Savage World, a protected wilderness preserve containing 50 different apex predator species from across the galaxy. Your task is simple: track, capture, and return 3 different apex predators within 10 standard days. Killing a creature results in immediate disqualification. Each participant will receive a basic survival pack, an emergency beacon, and a recording drone to verify captures. The display showed various monsters, things with too many teeth, things with armor plates, things that looked like they could eat a tank. The winner receives resource rights for their homeworld, advanced technology access, and eternal glory. May your hunts be successful. The hologram vanished. Immediately, the other hunters began talking amongst themselves, discussing strategies and comparing equipment. The two reptilian aliens approached a supply officer, requesting additional plasma nets and energy shields. Danny raised his hand. Everyone stopped and stared at him. "Yeah, quick question," Danny said. "Do we get to study the animals first? Like their behavior patterns or habitats or whatever?" The insect leader's translator responded. "All necessary data is available in the station database, though I doubt a human child can comprehend advanced ecology." "Cool. Thanks." Danny stood and headed toward the database terminals, ignoring the laughter that followed him. He spent the next 6 hours at a terminal, reading everything available about Savage World's ecosystem. Other hunters came and went, most spending maybe 20 minutes reviewing technical data before leaving to prepare equipment or rest. Danny stayed, taking notes on his phone about weather patterns, terrain types, water sources, and especially how different predator species interacted with each other. An older alien eventually sat down next to him. This one looked humanoid, but with weathered gray skin and scars across his face. He wore simple clothing and carried a beaten backpack. "You're the Earth kid," the alien said in surprisingly good English. "Word travels fast. Name's Briggs. I run the equipment depot here. Been watching these hunts for 30 years. He glanced at Danny's screen. "You're actually studying the ecosystem." Seemed important. Most hunters focus on individual targets. They look at what they want to catch and ignore everything else. Briggs leaned back. "You know what separates good hunters from dead ones?" "What?" "Good hunters understand that everything is connected. The prey, the predators, the plants, the weather, all of it. You can't hunt in a vacuum." He stood up, patting Danny's shoulder. "Keep doing what you're doing, kid. You might surprise people." After Briggs left, Danny continued reading until his eyes hurt. He learned that shadow panthers hunted near river systems. Titan serpents avoided volcanic regions. Razorback boars migrated based on fruit tree cycles. The information built a picture in his mind. Not of individual monsters, but of a living, breathing world with patterns and logic. By the time officials announced that transport would begin in the morning, Danny had filled 30 pages of notes. Other hunters were showing off their gear, testing weapons, making alliance proposals. Danny went to his assigned quarters, a small room with a basic bed, and reviewed his notes one more time. He thought about what his grandmother had taught him. Don't fight nature, work with it. Understand the patterns, be patient. Tomorrow he'd be dropped alone into an alien wilderness to hunt creatures that could kill him in seconds. Danny set his phone. The transport pod shook as it entered Savage World's atmosphere. Danny gripped his seat and watched through the viewport as alien jungle rushed up to meet him. The pod's computer announced landing coordinates in a language he didn't understand, then switched to English. Participant Daniel Wright, you will be deployed in Sector 7, a temperate forest region. Your survival pack includes water purification tablets, basic medical supplies, emergency beacon, and recording drone. Good luck. The pod hit the ground with a thud that rattled Danny's teeth. The door hissed open, releasing him into humidity that immediately made his hoodie stick to his back. He grabbed his backpack and grandmother's knife, then stepped out into an alien world. Trees surrounded him, but not like Earth trees. These had purple bark and leaves that shifted colors when the wind blew. Strange bird calls echoed from every direction. Something rustled in the undergrowth, and Danny froze instinctively, his training kicking in before his brain caught up. The recording drone bobbed out of the pod after him, a floating sphere about the size of a basketball. It blinked a small light indicating it was active and recording. Somewhere the galaxy was watching. Danny took a breath and forced himself to relax. This was just camping. Weird alien camping, but still just camping. He spent the first hour doing absolutely nothing except sitting against a tree and observing. Other hunters were probably racing off to track their first target. Danny knew better. Rushing into unknown territory was how people got hurt or lost. First, you learn the environment. Then you move. He watched insects crawl across the purple bark, noticed that some trees had claw marks about 7 feet up, heard different layers of sound as day animals settled and evening animals woke, felt the temperature drop 3 degrees as the sun moved behind clouds that looked normal, but apparently weren't, based on their orange color. After that first hour, Danny started moving slowly through the forest, reading signs. Fresh tracks here, probably from something big based on the depth. Broken branches there. at a height that suggested something climbed recently, scat near a fallen log, which he examined carefully with a stick, noting the contents included bones and fur. The drone followed him silently, recording everything. By evening, Danny had mapped a rough mental picture of the area. There was a stream about half a mile east. A game trail ran north-south through a clearing. A large predator definitely lived somewhere nearby, based on territorial markings. Smaller creatures used the mid-level branches for travel, avoiding the ground. He found a decent spot to make camp, a rocky overhang that provided shelter and a view of the surrounding area. No fire. Fire attracted attention, and Danny wasn't ready for attention yet. He ate an energy bar from his pack and checked his phone. No messages, obviously, no signal. But he'd taken photos of his notes back on the station, so he could review the information about different predators. Shadow panthers. The notes said they were ambush predators that could bend light around themselves, making them nearly invisible. They hunted near water sources at dawn and dusk. Preferred prey was medium-sized herbivores, extremely territorial. Danny thought about the stream he'd found and the game trail. If herbivores came to drink and shadow panthers hunted near water, then the area around that stream was probably active hunting ground. He decided to check it out tomorrow. That night, Danny barely slept. Not because he was scared, but because the forest was incredibly loud. Things howled, screeched, and made sounds like grinding metal. The drone's light stayed dim but visible, a small comfort in the darkness. When purple dawn light filtered through the canopy, Danny was already awake and moving toward the stream. He approached carefully, staying downwind and moving slowly. The stream was beautiful in an alien way, with water that looked slightly too blue and rocks that had crystal formations growing on them. Danny found a spot about 50 yards from the water and settled in to watch. 2 hours later, his patience paid off. A creature that looked like a 6-legged deer came to drink, moving nervously and checking its surroundings constantly. Danny remained perfectly still, barely breathing. Then he saw it. Not the shadow panther itself, but the effect it created. A shimmer in the air near the opposite bank, like heat waves, but wrong. The shimmer moved closer to the deer thing. Danny watched how it moved, watched how it positioned itself downwind, watched how it waited for the perfect moment when the prey lowered its head to drink. The attack was fast. The deer thing barely managed to leap away, crashing into the forest with the shimmer close behind. Danny heard the chase fade into the distance. He'd learned 3 important things. First, shadow panthers attacked from downwind. Second, they preferred prey that was distracted. Third, they chased for short distances but gave up quickly if the prey escaped the initial ambush. Danny spent the rest of the day tracking the shadow panther's movements. He never saw it directly, but he found its traces. Claw marks on trees where it sharpened its claws, a half-eaten carcass hidden under leaves. A particular tree it seemed to rest in during the hot afternoon, based on crushed moss patterns on a thick branch. By evening, Danny had a plan forming. He couldn't catch the shadow panther by chasing it or fighting it, but he could use what he knew about its behavior. He spent the next morning gathering materials. Strong vines from a particular plant species, flexible branches, leaves that smelled strongly, which he crushed and saved. He worked slowly and carefully, building something simple but effective. The trap took all day to prepare. A pit, carefully disguised, placed exactly where the game trail met the stream. Not deep enough to hurt the panther, but deep enough to contain it temporarily. Danny used the crushed leaves to mask his scent and placed bait, a portion of the carcass he'd found, in a position that would require the panther to approach from a specific angle. Then he climbed a tree 70 yards away and waited. Waiting was the hardest part. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. Danny's legs cramped. The drone recorded everything with what seemed like judgment. Just before dusk, the shimmer appeared. Danny felt his heart rate increase but forced himself to stay calm and still. The shadow panther approached the bait cautiously, circling it once, twice, checking for danger. Then it stepped exactly where Danny needed it to step. The ground gave way. The panther fell with a startled sound that broke its camouflage, revealing a creature that looked like a big cat made of living darkness with glowing yellow eyes. It thrashed in the pit but couldn't climb the smooth sides. Danny climbed down and approached carefully. Using the vines he'd prepared, he secured the creature without getting close enough for it to reach him. The recording drone News of Danny's first capture spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communication. In his small room back on Frontier Base 7, Briggs watched the footage and smiled. On Earth, Ruth Wright nodded once and went back to tending her garden. In the Galactic Confederation chambers, officials who had called the human participation an embarrassment suddenly became very quiet. Danny knew none of this. He'd released the Shadow Panther after the capture was verified, watching it sprint away into the forest, probably very confused and angry. Now he needed his second target. And he'd chosen something that made the drone's operator, somewhere in space, flag the recording with a priority alert: the Thornback Apex. A creature the size of a small truck, covered in armored plates and venomous spines. In the competition's 400-year history, only 3 had ever been captured, and all 3 attempts had required teams of hunters with advanced technology. Danny found signs of one living in the volcanic region north of his landing site. It took him a full day of hiking to reach the territory, and another day of careful observation from a safe distance. The Thornback looked exactly like something that should not exist. Its body was low and wide with legs thick as tree trunks. The armor plates shifted and clicked when it moved. The spines along its back were as long as Danny's arm, and dripped with something that made the ground smoke where it fell. But Danny didn't focus on how dangerous it was. He focused on its behavior. The creature was methodical. Every morning it patrolled a specific route around its territory, marking certain rocks with scent glands. Every afternoon when the volcanic heat became intense, it traveled to a mud wallow to cool down. It always used the same wallow, always approached from the same direction, always stayed for exactly 2 hours before returning to its den. Danny spent 3 days just watching and taking notes. The drone recorded everything, which confused galactic analysts who expected immediate action. Human observers started calling him patient. Military strategists called him smart. Ruth called it basic common sense. On the 4th day, Danny began his preparation. He needed to move the Thornback from its wallow to a specific location, and he needed to do it without getting close enough for those venomous spines to reach him. Fire was the answer. Not to hurt the creature, but to guide it. Danny studied the wind patterns and spent an entire day gathering specific plants that produced thick smoke when burned. He created a line of small fire pits, carefully positioned to drive smoke in a particular direction without actually spreading the fire. The next afternoon, when the Thornback went to its wallow, Danny lit the fires in sequence. The smoke billowed thick and low, not dangerous but extremely unpleasant. The Thornback, confused and annoyed, left the wallow early and moved away from the smoke. Danny kept the smoke flowing, adjusting the fires to create a path the creature could follow comfortably. He wasn't chasing it. He was suggesting a direction, and the Thornback, wanting to avoid the smoke, naturally followed the path of least resistance. It took 6 hours of careful management. Danny moved quietly through the volcanic rocks, always staying far from the creature, always keeping the smoke between them. The Thornback never saw him, never felt threatened, just kept moving away from the irritation. Finally, Danny guided it into a narrow canyon he'd scouted earlier. The canyon had steep walls and a single entrance. Once the Thornback moved deep enough into the canyon, Danny triggered his trap. He'd spent 2 days carefully weakening specific rocks along the canyon's upper edge. Now, using a long lever he'd constructed from a fallen tree trunk, he dislodged those rocks. They fell in a calculated collapse not on the creature but behind it, blocking the exit. The Thornback spun around, finding itself trapped. It roared, a sound that shook Danny's bones, and charged at the rockfall. But the rocks were too heavy and too many. The creature was contained. Danny approached carefully with strong vines he'd braided together over the past days. Using a long stick, he managed to secure the vines around the Thornback's legs without getting close. The creature thrashed and tried to reach him with its venomous spines, but Danny stayed just beyond range, patient and careful. The recording drone verified the capture. 2 down, 1 to go. Back on Frontier Base 7, the viewing hall was packed. What started as entertainment, watching the foolish human fail, had become something else. Hunters from dozens of species watched Danny's methods with growing respect. The 2 reptilian brothers who had mocked him earlier were notably silent. The insect commander, who had successfully captured 2 creatures using military precision, studied Danny's recordings like textbooks. The robot hunter ran probability calculations and concluded that human intuition operated on variables it couldn't measure. The large bear creature, having captured one target through spiritual connection and brute strength, nodded in approval of Danny's approach. The cat-like noble, who had also captured two creatures but at great cost to her equipment and pride, refused to watch the recordings. She told everyone who would listen that primitive methods were lucky, not skilled. Nobody was listening to her anymore. On Savage World, Danny sat by a small stream and reviewed his notes about the third target he'd chosen. The impossible one. The creature that would either prove he understood what he was doing or prove he'd been lucky all along. The Void Stalker, a predator that existed partially outside normal space, could phase through solid matter, and had never been captured in the competition's entire history. Danny studied his notes until the light faded. Then he studied them more by the light of the recording drone, which had apparently been upgraded to include a spotlight function after someone in the control center decided to help him. He thought about everything his grandmother taught him. Every hunt came down to understanding behavior and environment. It didn't matter how strange the animal was. It still needed to eat, sleep, and avoid danger. It still had instincts. It still followed patterns. The Void Stalker could phase through matter, but according to his research, there were limits. Extreme temperatures disrupted the phasing ability. The creature avoided certain types of electromagnetic fields. It hunted in specific territory and returned to the same resting spots. Danny could work with that. He spent the next 2 days not hunting, but preparing the environment itself. He mapped the Void Stalker's territory completely, identifying every spot it had been seen or left traces. He studied the terrain, the temperature variations, the underground water sources. Then he began to reshape the creature's hunting ground, not by building traps, but by influencing where its prey would go. He drove smaller animals toward specific areas. He blocked certain paths with his scent. He used calls he'd learned from watching local predators to create sounds that made prey animals nervous in particular locations. The Void Stalker would follow its prey. 2 days of careful work turned the Void Stalker's hunting territory into a maze of invisible influences. Danny had never actually seen the creature clearly. It appeared as a distortion in space, like looking at something through rippling water, visible only when it moved and only if you knew what to look for. But he'd found its patterns. The Void Stalker hunted every evening between dusk and full dark. It preferred prey that traveled alone. It always approached from higher ground. And most importantly, it avoided areas where temperature dropped below a certain point because extreme cold disrupted its ability to phase between dimensions. Danny found a location where underground springs created natural cold spots in the ground. The area was small, maybe 30 feet across, and surrounded by warmer territory. Normally, prey animals avoided the cold spot because it was uncomfortable. Danny needed to make it attractive. He spent hours gathering fresh vegetation and piling it in the cold area, creating what looked like abundant food. He used sounds to drive small prey animals away from their usual feeding grounds. Hungry and confused, they would eventually find the new food source. Then came the hard part. Danny needed to create barriers that the Void Stalker couldn't cross, but barriers that didn't look like barriers. He used the underground springs to create channels of extremely cold water that ran in a pattern around the cold spot. The channels were narrow and easy for prey to cross, but for the Void Stalker, they would be walls. The creature couldn't phase through extreme temperature differences. It took him another full day to perfect the pattern. The channels formed a maze with only one entrance, and that entrance led directly to the center of the cold spot. Danny made sure the approach path felt natural, following the contours of the land in a way that wouldn't seem artificial. On the evening of the 9th day, with only 1 day left before the competition ended, Danny positioned himself in a tree 200 yards from his trap and waited. The drone hovered near him, its spotlight off, recording in low-light mode. Across the galaxy, millions watched. Betting pools had formed about whether the human would succeed or fail. The odds had shifted dramatically since the competition began. Dusk arrived with purple and orange clouds. Danny controlled his breathing, staying perfectly still. His legs were cramped from 3 hours of not moving, but he ignored the discomfort. His grandmother had made him practice this. Deer hunting in Oregon required patience that most people couldn't imagine. Small prey animals found the food Danny had placed. A group of six-legged creatures that looked like rabbits mixed with lizards began eating the fresh vegetation, nervous but hungry. More arrived. Soon there were dozens, all focused on the unexpected feast. Then Danny saw it, or rather saw the distortion. The air rippled near the upper rocks, flowing like water down toward the feeding animals. The Void Stalker was hunting. The creature moved silently, a ghost made of bent space and predator instinct. It circled the cold spot once, and Danny held his breath. If the Void Stalker sensed the trap, it would leave and Danny would fail. But the creature saw prey. Lots of prey, distracted and easy. It approached along the exact path Danny had left open, moving through the maze of cold channels without realizing they were guiding it. The Void Stalker entered the cold spot. Immediately, its form became more visible as the extreme temperature disrupted its phasing ability. It appeared as a creature made of shadow and sharp angles, with too many limbs and eyes that glowed like dying stars. It lunged at the prey animals, catching two before the rest scattered. The Void Stalker tried to phase through the ground to chase them, but the cold prevented it. Confused, it tried to leave the cold spot. That's when it discovered the channels. Every direction it turned, extreme cold blocked its path. The channels weren't deep enough to trap a normal creature, but for the Void Stalker they were impassable walls. It was caught in a cage made of temperature. Danny climbed down from his tree and approached slowly. The creature saw him and made a sound that hurt Danny's ears and made reality feel temporarily uncertain. It was clearly intelligent enough to understand it had been outsmarted, and it was not happy. Using the vines he'd prepared, Danny created a harness that could contain the creature without touching it directly. The Void Stalker struggled and tried to phase away, but the cold kept it solid. The process took an hour of careful work, with Danny staying just outside the cold spot and using long poles to position the vines. Finally, the recording drone chimed. The capture was verified. Danny sat down on the warm ground outside the cold spot, exhausted. 3 captures, 3 days ahead of schedule. The impossible hunt completed by a 17-year-old kid from Oregon. The galaxy watched in silence. In the viewing hall at Frontier Base 7, the silence broke into noise. Some species cheered, others argued. The reptilian brothers stared at the screen with what might have been respect. The insect commander approached a communication terminal and sent a message directly to Earth's representatives, requesting information about human training methods. The robot hunter's processors struggled with the data. Logically, the human should not have succeeded. Limited equipment, no advanced technology, minimal physical advantages. Yet the results were undeniable. The variable it couldn't account for was intuition, the ability to understand complex systems through observation and experience rather than pure calculation. The cat-like noble left the viewing hall without a word, her servants hurrying behind her. Only Briggs remained calm, watching the screen with a knowing smile. He'd seen it in Danny's eyes from the beginning. The kid had something most hunters lost when their species became advanced. He still thought like prey and predator simultaneously. He understood that hunting wasn't about dominance. It was about becoming part of the cycle. On Savage World, Danny released the Void Stalker carefully. The creature immediately phased away once it escaped the cold spot, disappearing into whatever dimension it called home. Danny hoped it wasn't too traumatized by the experience. He gathered his backpack and started the long walk back to his pickup coordinates. The competition had 1 day remaining, but Danny was finished. He'd completed the challenge. Now he just wanted to go home. The recording drone followed him through the alien forest as purple sunset turned to darkness. Somewhere above, stars that weren't his stars shined down on a world that wasn't his world. Danny thought about his grandmother's porch and realized the award ceremony hall glittered with lights from 1,000 worlds. Danny stood on a platform wearing the same jeans and hoodie he'd worn for the entire competition, now stained with mud and torn in several places. Around him, other hunters wore ceremonial armor and formal clothing from their cultures. The bird lizard official who had sent the original invitation stood at a massive podium, speaking through translators to the assembled crowd. Behind him, screens showed highlights from the hunt. Danny's captures played on repeat, analyzed by experts who still couldn't quite believe what they'd seen. In 400 years of competition, the official announced, We have never witnessed such an efficient display of hunting skill. 3 captures in 9 days, including the legendary Void Stalker, with 0 injuries and minimal equipment. The Galactic Confederation is honored to declare Daniel Wright of Earth the winner of this year's Apex hunt. Polite applause echoed through the hall. Some species showed enthusiasm, others merely acknowledgement. Danny noticed the 2 reptilian brothers in the audience. They stood and pressed their fists to their chests, a gesture of warrior respect. Danny nodded back awkwardly. The cat-like noble sat with perfect posture, her face showing nothing. She'd completed her 3 captures but barely made the deadline and had damaged expensive equipment in the process. Her pride was clearly wounded more than her body. The insect commander approached the platform when the ceremony allowed for congratulations. Her translator buzzed efficiently. "Human Daniel Wright, my hive wishes to study your methods. We have fought wars across galaxies and trained hunters for 10,000 years. Yet you showed us perspectives we had forgotten. Would you consider teaching?" I can't. I have school," Danny said, which caused a confused murmur among species that didn't understand the concept of mandatory youth education. The large bear creature named Tusk came forward next, moving with surprising gentleness for something his size. He bowed deeply, a gesture that made several observers gasp because Tusk never bowed to anyone. "Small human, you hunt with wisdom. The spirit spoke to me of your victory before it happened. You walk between worlds like the old ones of my people. I give you blessing." Tusk placed a carved wooden charm in Danny's hand and walked away before Danny could respond. Even the robot hunter approached, its optical sensors focusing on Danny with unsettling intensity. "I have calculated 73,000 possible approaches to the Void Stalker capture. None matched your method. You operated outside predictable patterns while still maintaining logical consistency. This should not be possible. I request permission to study you." "That's kind of creepy." "So no," Danny said. The robot tilted its head, processed this, and retreated with what might have been confusion. Through all the attention and celebration, Danny just wanted to leave. The official prize presentation took another hour. Earth was granted resource rights to mineral-rich asteroid fields, access to advanced medical technology, and trade agreements that would boost the planet's economy for generations. Earth's representatives, dressed in formal suits and looking extremely relieved, accepted the awards. They tried to get Danny to pose for photos. He did, but he looked miserable in all of them, which somehow made them more popular across galactic social networks. Finally, the ceremony ended. Danny was escorted to a transport ship heading back to Earth. Briggs met him at the departure gate. "You did good, kid," the old hunter said. "Better than good. You reminded a lot of species about things they'd forgotten." "I just did what my grandma taught me," Danny replied. "Exactly. That's the point." Briggs handed him a small package. "Your grandmother's knife served you well, but you'll need your own tools now. These are from my personal collection. Earned them over 50 years of hunting. Figure you'll put them to better use than they'd get sitting in my locker." Danny opened the package to find 3 knives of different sizes, each made from materials he didn't recognize but felt perfectly balanced. "I can't take these. Too late. Already gave them to you. Can't take back a gift in my culture." "Bad luck," Briggs smiled. "Besides, something tells me you'll need them eventually. Galaxy's a big place and now everyone knows your name. That brings opportunities and problems in equal measure." The transport ship's boarding call echoed through the station. Danny shook Briggs's hand and headed for the ramp. The journey back to Earth took 3 days. Danny slept most of it, finally able to relax. When the ship entered Earth's atmosphere and he saw the familiar blue and green of his homeworld, something tight in his chest loosened. Landing brought chaos. Media everywhere. Government officials wanting statements, people cheering. Danny was rushed through it all, giving short answers and trying not to look directly at camera flashes. A military escort drove him to Oregon. They wanted to take him to Portland for more ceremonies. Danny refused and gave them his grandmother's address. The driver, a young Marine who looked impressed and slightly terrified of Danny, didn't argue. Ruth's homestead appeared exactly as Danny had left it. The garden still grew. The porch still creaked. The forest still surrounded everything with comfortable silence. Ruth stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the military vehicle approach. Danny got out with his backpack and Briggs's knives. The escort waited to make sure he was safe. Ruth waved them away and they left. "You look terrible," Ruth said. Alien planets aren't great for hygiene, Danny replied. You hungry?
Starving, they went inside.
Ruth had made stew, apparently confident Danny would return. They ate in silence for a while, just the sound of spoons on bowls in the forest outside the windows. Government's going to want you to do appearances, Ruth said eventually. Talk shows, interviews, all that. Yeah. You going to do them? Do I have to? No, you're a minor. I can tell them to leave you alone until you're 18. Ruth finished her stew. Might be good for Earth's image, though. Show the galaxy that humans are worth respect. Danny thought about it. Maybe a few. But then I want to come home and finish school. That's reasonable. Ruth collected the bowls. What did you learn out there? Danny considered the question seriously. That most problems are simpler than people make them. That watching is better than acting sometimes. That expensive equipment doesn't replace understanding. He paused. And that the things you taught me actually matter. I always thought they were just survival skills for camping. They are survival skills. Just turns out survival is more universal than we thought. Ruth smiled slightly. Your grandfather would be proud. I'm proud too, though I'll deny saying that if you tell anyone. That evening, Danny sat on the porch and watched the forest. His phone had about 3,000 messages he was ignoring. News sites were calling him humanity's champion. Scientists wanted to study his methods. Schools wanted him to speak at graduations, but right now, in this moment, he was just a kid sitting on his grandmother's porch in rural Oregon, watching deer move through the trees and automatically tracking their movement patterns. He noticed everything. The wind direction. The moisture in the air suggesting rain tomorrow. The way birds reacted to something passing below their perch. The old patterns, the ones humans learned before technology, before civilization. Back when survival meant understanding the world instead of controlling it. Danny realized he'd always see the world this way now. Couldn't turn it off even if he wanted to. His grandmother had trained him too well. He figured that was probably okay. The galaxy was bigger than he'd imagined, stranger than he'd expected, and apparently paying attention now. If humans were going to be part of that galaxy, maybe someone should remember the simple things. Above him, stars appeared as the sun set. Some of those stars had planets where creatures hunted and lived and died in patterns as old as time. Danny had walked among them and learned they weren't so different from Earth's creatures after all. Everything alive followed rules. You just had to learn what those rules were and work with them instead of against them. That was the secret his grandmother knew. That was what he'd shown the galaxy. And that was what he'd carry forward